roughly 3 billion years before anyone could speak or wonder, the atoms that would one day become people drifted inside Earth's newborn seas. Over eons, those atoms assembled into amino acids, single-celled algae, and finally the first animals that crept across Cambrian silt. Much later, around 6 million years ago, the earliest hominids split from a common ancestor shared with chimpanzees. That quiet genetic fork lit the slow-burning fuse of the human story. For millions of years, these upright apes experimented with posture, teeth, and brain, gaining a cubic centimeter of gray matter every few tens of millennia. Ardipithecus walked on two legs yet still grabbed branches with a flexible big toe. Australopithecus afarensis left footprints in Tanzanian ash, proof of a pelvis built for distance. Simple stone flakes found in Kenya show that by 3.3 million years ago, early toolmakers were already cracking bones for marrow-coaxing extra calories out of hostile savannas. Evolution rewarded efficiency. By 2.1 million years ago, Homo habilis handy man fashioned sharper cores and scrapers. Bigger carnivores prowled the Pleistocene, but nimble cooperation and a richer diet let habilis survive droughts that destroyed less adaptable lines. The brain kept swelling, and metabolism demanded ever more energy. Fire, perhaps first tended by opportunistic scavengers, gradually became technology rather than accident. Charred bones at South Africa's Wonderwork cave hint at controlled hearths nearly 1 million years old. About 1.9 million years ago, Homo erectus emerged. Taller, long-legged, and sweat-gland-rich erectus could chase antelope under the African sun until the animals collapsed from heatstroke. That endurance hunting paired with the elegant Acheulean hand axe whose form spread from Kenya to Georgia marked a cognitive leap. With new skills came Wanderlust erectus, became the first human relative to leave Africa, reaching the Caucasus, Southeast Asia, and Java. Glacial rhythms reshaped continents and behaviors alike. Changing climates forced erectus bands to exploit varied ecosystems, open grassland, temperate woodland, coastal delta. Cooperative childcare likely evolved to shorten birth intervals while still protecting vulnerable young. Skull volumes support the social brain idea. Early Australopiths averaged 450 cc. Late erectus exceeded 900 cc. In chilly Europe, Homo heidelbergensis arrived wielding wooden spears for big game ambush. From one of its lineages about 430,000 years ago, the Neanderthals took shape, barrel-chested frames and wide noses built to humidify frigid air. On the Indonesian island of Flores, isolation shrank an offshoot into the 1-meter-tall hobbit, Homo floresiensis. Diversity, not linear progress, defined the Middle Pleistocene. Back in Africa, a genetic cascade reorganized the frontal lobes, fostering abstraction and complex grammar. Fossils at Jebel Irhoud, dated 315,000 years, reveal faces recognizably modern. These early Homo sapiens traded ochre and seashells hundreds of kilometers inland, evidence of symbolism and long-distance networks. Wet corridors alternated with Saharan deserts. A failed early exodus reached Greece 210,000 years ago. A later pulse around 70,000 years ago succeeded spectacularly. Small bands skirted the Arabian littoral and fanned into Eurasia, Australia, and eventually the Americas. Everywhere they went, sapiens met cousins and interbred, picking up immune genes from Neanderthals and Denisovans. But by 40,000 years ago, those archaic peoples were gone. On mammoth-studded steppes, innovation accelerated bone needles. Tailored parkas, ochre bison. On cave walls fluted Clovis points for bison. Language enabled knowledge torrents. Myths bound identity. Mobile egalitarian bands traded obsidian across hundreds of kilometers, yet possessions remained personal, not inherited. By 16,000 years ago, retreating glaciers opened new frontiers. Groups crossed the Bering Land Bridge, others perfected salmon harpoons in European refugia. Rising temperatures and megafaunal loss nudged people toward landscape management, setting grass fires, tending nut groves, protecting wild cereals. The Younger Dryas cold snap. 900 BCE tested resilience again. Near East groups guarding stands of einkorn nudged plants toward domestication. The age of agriculture loomed. Neanderthal communities, meanwhile, were not the brutes of legend. They buried their dead with red pigment, wore eagle talon ornaments, and ventured deep into caves for art. Yet their world, perhaps a few 100,000 individuals dispersed across 2 continents, was vulnerable to drought eruption and the arrival of a cousin whose networks spanned horizons Neanderthals barely imagined. When the Younger Dryas finally thawed, 11,700 BCE global temperatures leapt in a geological heartbeat. Sea levels rose, forests recolonized barren steppe, and migratory game shifted ranges. Homo sapiens, now the planet's sole human species, entered the Holocene armed with millennia of ecological knowledge and an increasingly experimental attitude toward food security, toward cultivation. In eastern Anatolia, hunters noticed disturbed soil around Camp Middens sprouted dense cereals. They began scattering seed before seasonal migration. Along the Jordan Valley, Natufian foragers built stone-ringed houses and bedrock mortars. Dental calculus carries wild grain microfossils. Storage pits allowed autumn surplus to last through lean winters, encouraging permanence unthinkable to Ice Age ancestors. Birth rates rose, pressing every patch of wild wheat harder until larger kernels and tougher raches signaled true domestication. Global experiments. China's Yellow River groups ground wild millet 19,000 years ago. South Yangtze foragers protected rice in flood retreat pools. New Guinea highlanders drained swamps for sago palms. Along the Andes coast, people cultivated gourds for floats, then cotton for fishing nets long before they farmed maize. In eastern North America, goosefoot and sunflower were pseudo-crops, while Australian First Nations used fire stick mosaics to coax kangaroo pasture. Agriculture was not a single invention, but many local negotiations between people, plants, and climate. Around this time, climatic lurches demanded ingenuity. A meltwater pulse from Lake Agassiz flooded coasts. In drowned Sundaland, marooned hilltops bred canoe builders who invented barbed bone gorges and woven crab traps. Inland shrinking herds forced diets to broaden roasted locusts, fermented tubers, acorn broth. Genetic evidence hints at a bottleneck 70,000 years ago, perhaps the echo of Toba's volcanic winter, followed by explosive rebound, once creativity outweighed scarcity. Culture, not anatomy, had become humanity's ultimate survival trait. Technology and social ties. At the same time, artisans refined fire. Clay-lined hearths withstood embers for days, enabling low-temperature pottery and the first glazed beads. Birch bark pitch served as adhesive. Manganese dioxide dust made kindling ignite cooler. Fibercraft blossomed twisted cord nets, woven baskets for spikelets, while dogs first domesticated by 15,000 BCE guarded stores and helped hunt. Göbekli Tepe. BCE crowns a limestone hill with T-pillars ringed by carved foxes and vultures. Lacking wells or domestic refuse, it looks like a pilgrimage arena where hunter bands feasted, danced, and renewed alliances. Monumental architecture thus predated settled farming. Shared myth could rally labor before kings or temples existed, peopling the planet. Maritime pioneers paddled Pacific shoals crossing to the Bismarck Archipelago and Buka Island by 10,000 BCE, proof of star navigation and outriggers. In the Americas, Clovis culture yielded to Folsom and Plano bison hunters. In Amazonia, charcoal-rich terra preta betrayed soil-building experiments. Everywhere humans reshaped ecosystems more profoundly than the megafauna they had displaced. The end of the beginning. By the close of the 10th millennium BCE, perhaps 5 million people roamed Earth. They spoke thousands of languages, worshipped spirits of river and sky, chipped stone and knotted memory into string. Yet they stood on the cusp of a transformation that would dwarf all previous adaptations. Within millennia, Jericho and Çatalhöyük would sprout behind mud brick walls. Goat sheep and cattle would graze under human guard. Surplus grain would feed specialists, priests, and chiefs. Irrigation canals, taxation standing armies, and written law waited just beyond the horizon. Hominids had once numbered in the thousands and lived at nature's mercy. Through curiosity and cooperation, Homo sapiens had survived ice volcano and drought. Now, at 10,000 BCE, humanity possessed both the tools and temperament to remake entire ecosystems. The age of cities beckoned, rooted in the mobile camps, seasonal feasts, and patient seedbeds of the last hunter-gatherers. Some 10 millennia after the last ice age, thawed human groups clustered along flood-fed river valleys, where silt turned every spring into a gift. Foremost was Sumer, wedged between the Tigris and Euphrates. By about 4000 BCE, the low-lying plain around a settlement called Uruk was checkboarded with irrigation ditches. Wheat and barley no longer came from wild stands. They germinated in fields that farmers measured with rope, weeded with flint sickles, and harvested for the city's granaries. Processing grain was laborious. Women and adolescents spent dawn to dusk kneeling at the saddlestone hand mill, sliding a loaf-shaped upper rock across a fixed lower slab to crush kernels into meal. The chore wore enamel from teeth and compressed vertebrae, yet it gave Uruk caloric certainty. Within centuries, mud brick dwellings, workshops, and ziggurats sprawled behind 10-kilometer walls. Population may have topped 50,000, mankind's first true city. Agriculture carried a biological price. Diet heavy in carbohydrates and low in varied proteins stunted growth. Skeletons show average male height shrinking from 1.75 meters to about 1.6 cm. Hunters who once sprinted after gazelles became artisans with arthritic knees. Even mobility changed. Villagers seldom ventured beyond canal horizons. In return, they gained temples, accounting tablets, and an institutional memory transmitted on clay. Uruk's heroic monarch Gilgamesh probably ruled sometime in the early dynastic period. Epic poetry later cast him two-thirds divine, wrestling forest demons and seeking immortality. Whatever the truth, the poem preserves a Sumerian worldview. The gods award kingship, but even kings must face death. Near 2334 BCE, that crown passed to outsiders when Sargon of Akkad marched downriver, seized Sumer, and proclaimed the first territorial empire, its Akkadian tongue supplanting Sumerian in court and market. East of the Iranian plateau, another experiment blossomed. The Indus Valley Civilization. 2600. 1900 BCE raised twin capitals, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, beside seasonal rivers now long dried. Their baked brick houses opened onto paved lanes pierced by inspection hatches. Each home contained a seated toilet connected to a covered drain that fed a citywide sewer, an urban convenience Egypt would not match for millennia. Despite thousands of stamp seals, their script remains undeciphered, so the names of Indus engineers are silent. But the flush of their drainage still echoes civilization's promise: organized water equals public health. While Indus masons laid terracotta pipes, Egyptian surveyors paced out tombs for god-kings. Floods of the Nile made the Black Land fertile, and surplus funded monuments to eternity. Around 2667 BCE, King Djoser and his architect Imhotep stacked 6 limestone mastabas into the step pyramid at Saqqara, history's first large stone building. A few generations later, Sneferu refined geometry. His bent pyramid shifts angle mid-rise. His red pyramid achieves the true pyramid silhouette. The apex belonged to Khufu, Over roughly 20 years, c. 2589-2566 BCE, quarry gangs cut and hauled 2.3 million blocks aligning the Great Pyramid of Giza to cardinal points with sub-arc minute accuracy. Such effort was not vanity alone. Egyptian theology held that a pharaoh's chaos survived death, but required a palace, grave goods, and ongoing ritual to thrive in the afterlife. Thus, pyramid building was national policy anchoring social order. Daily life followed its own hierarchy. Peasants sowed emmer and flax, paid grain tax, and during inundation, months joined corvée teams lifting stone. Above them, craftsmen carved statuary, merchants ferried papyrus and incense along the Nile, and scribes' products of special schools recorded every basket delivered. Priests managed temple estates. Nobles governed nomes. Soldiers guarded mines in Sinai. At the apex stood the divine king, mediator between gods and men. Egypt's political pyramid replicated the one of stone. Across the Yellow River, an origin legend unfolded. Recurrent floods devastated millet fields until the engineer hero Yu spent 13 years dredging channels, taming the torrents. And legend says walking past his own doorstep without entering to finish the task. For such merit, the people acclaimed him founder of the semi-mythic Shia dynasty trad. 270, 1600 BCE. Fact or embellishment? The tale embedded a principle revolutionary for its age. Sovereignty could be earned by service, not merely inherited, an idea Chinese philosophers would revisit for 3,000 years. Back in Mesopotamia, Hammurabi of Babylon, or 1792 to 1750 BCE, fixed royal justice in basalt. His stele lists 282 edicts. False accusers face death, an eye for an eye between social equals. Lesser compensation when the victim is a slave. The law stratified society openly, nobles, freemen, dependents, slaves, codifying inequality, yet promising predictability in place of vendetta. For the first time, commoners could point to written tablets and say, the king himself proclaimed these rules. Northwest in Anatolia, Labarnas forged scattered Hittite hill forts into an empire. His successors mastered chariot warfare and iron smelting, soon rivaling Egypt for Near Eastern dominance. To the west, in rocky peninsular Greece, wealthy citadels, Mycenae Tiryns and Pylos, flourished behind cyclopean walls. Linear B tablets reveal a palace economy tallying oil, bronze, and captive women, familiar bureaucratic patterns wearing new Aegean names. Hieroglyphs call Ramesses II. Strong and right, chosen of Ra. Ascending in 1279 BCE, he raised Abu Simbel and the vast Ramessium, but glory required victory. Eastward lay Kadesh, a fortress guarding Syrian trade now held by Hittite king Muwatalli II. Ramesses marched with 4 divisions, unaware spies had doubled enemy numbers. In the ensuing clash, chariots milled in dust. The Nile prince was nearly encircled, and evening brought stalemate. Though both courts carved triumph on temple walls, the outcome was a draw enough to teach prudence. Years later, Ramesses and Hattusili III ratified history's first recorded peace treaty, 1258 BCE, pledging mutual defense and eternal amity. Clay copies survive in Istanbul and Luxor, a silver one in the UN. The document proves ancient superpowers grasped diplomacy as surely as warfare. Beyond oceans, an equally ancient people sculpted memory in stone. The Olmec Sea, 1200–400 BCE of Veracruz, hacked basalt heads 3 meters tall and 15 tons in weight, each wearing a distinctive helmet. Lacking beasts of burden, artisans transported blocks by raft and log roller through steamy jungle to ritual plazas. Scholars debate whether the portraits depict kings, ball players, or deified ancestors, but the artistry announces a mother culture of Mesoamerica centuries before Teotihuacan or the Maya. Meanwhile, China's Zhou clan overthrew the Shang around 1046 BCE and explained the coup with the mandate of heaven. A single cosmic order bestows right to rule on virtuous kings, but withdraws it from tyrants. To manage vast territory, the Zhou granted fiefs to allied families, birthing a feudal web remarkably like Europe's: to come peasants till warriors defend lords, tax king presides. Intellectual ferment followed. Confucius 551–479 BCE would later codify ritual conscience Li and filial duty. Laozi taught harmony with the Tao. Both philosophies were seeds sown in early Zhou soil. By 1000 BCE, the civilized belt stretched from Brittany's megaliths to the Yellow Sea, from Nubian gold mines to Andes maize terraces. Cities writing bronze tools, formal law, stratified labor, and interregional exchange stitched humanity into networks that could outlast drought or dynastic fall. Yet the same networks amplified war, disease, and hierarchy. The pattern growth-contact-conflict adaptation was set, and the next millennium would test every civilization's resilience. By the dawn of the first millennium BCE, the Mediterranean sparkled with small but ambitious polities. On rocky Attica, a modest polis named Athens discovered silver at Laurion, financed a trireme fleet, and cultivated the radical idea that ordinary male citizens could legislate. Its rival Sparta forged an opposite experiment: state-run barracks, infancy inspection, hilot serfdom, and lifelong drill that turned boys into hoplites who could march 40 kilometers without rations. Eastern winds soon tested every system. In 550 BCE, Cyrus II of Persia overthrew his Median overlord, then swept through Lydia, Babylon, and the Indus Plain. His heir Darius I organized satrapies, minted standardized silver derricks, and ordered a royal road from Susa to Sardis, an artery on which messages galloped in a week. Athens' support for Ionian rebels angered Darius. He launched punitive expeditions that met humiliation on the beach at Marathon 490 BCE, when 10,000 Athenian citizen soldiers charged downhill and shattered twice their number of Persian infantry. Revenge fell to Darius's son Xerxes. He bridged the Hellespont with pontoon boats, herded perhaps 100,000 troops through Thrace, and confronted a delaying squad of 7,000 Greeks at narrow Thermopylae, 480 BCE. King Leonidas and 300 Spartans fought to the last man, buying time for Athens to evacuate. Weeks later, Themistocles lured Xerxes' fleet into the cramped straits of Salamis, where Greek oarsmen rammed unwieldy Persian hulls until the invader withdrew. A final Allied victory on the Plataean slopes, 479 BCE, ended imperial designs on mainland Greece. Freedom enabled an Athenian golden age. Pericles channeled Delian League tribute into marble temples, the Parthenon crowning the Acropolis, and civic pay that let poor men attend assembly or jury. Socrates challenged citizens to examine virtue. Plato warned that raw democracy risked mob folly. Aristotle catalogued constitutions and natural forms, tutoring a Macedonian prince named Alexander. Simultaneously, dramatists Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides probed hubris, while Aristophanes mocked them all in bawdy verse. But success bred rivalry. When Corinthian allies clashed, Athens and Sparta mobilized blocks, the Delian versus Peloponnesian leagues. 27 years of siege, plague, and naval disaster followed. Sparta's alliance with Persia, Athens' Sicilian misadventure, and the final surrender in 404 BCE left Greece exhausted. Power vacuums rarely stay empty. Northward Macedon poised to intervene. Philip II reformed Macedon's infantry into 16 deep Sarissa phalanxes, then subdued Thessaly and Thrace. When big ideas outlived him, 20-year-old Alexander seized the baton. In 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont, visited mythical Troy, and smashed Persian armies at Granicus Issus and decisive Gaugamela. Tyre fell after a 7-month siege. Egypt welcomed him as pharaoh. Babylon offered treasure, and Persepolis burned symbolically, ending Achaemenid rule. Marching east. Alexander pushed through the Hindu Kush, founded Alexandria on the Oxus, married Roxana of Bactria, and glimpsed the Indian monsoon on the Hyphasis, before mutinous veterans forced retreat. Fever killed him in Babylon 323 BCE. His corpse, pickled in honey, traveled to Ptolemaic Egypt, while his generals carved the empire into Ptolemaic Seleucid and Antigonid realms. Greek language now linked Mediterranean Nile and Indus. Scientists at Alexandria's museum measured Earth's circumference, while Stoics pondered cosmopolis citizenship. South Asia experienced its own swing from conquest to conscience. Chandragupta Maurya exploited the post-Alexandrian vacuum to unite the Ganges plain. His grandson Ashoka inherited a realm stretching from Afghanistan to Bengal, then waged a brutal campaign against Kalinga 261 BCE that slaughtered 100,000. Haunted, he embraced Buddhist Dhamma-inscribed edicts advocating nonviolence and tolerance, and dispatched monks as far as Sri Lanka and Syria. In China, the short-lived but iron-fisted Qin 221–206 BCE standardized axle widths, script weights, and walls. First Emperor Qin Shi Huang buried dissenting texts, fused state ideology with legalist discipline, and entombed himself alongside 8,000 terracotta soldiers. Revolt toppled Qin, yet its unification endured under the Han. Emperors Gaozu and Wu blended legalist bureaucracy with Confucian ethics. Zhang Qian's reporting on Central Asian horses opened the Silk Road, swapping Chinese silk for Roman glass via Parthian middlemen. Paper replaced bamboo slips. The seismograph and iron plow entered the record. Rome, meanwhile, evolved from an italic city-state into a republican juggernaut. 3 Punic Wars, 264–146 BCE, eradicated Carthage naval ingenuity, won Sicily. Hannibal's elephants rampaged Italy, but fell at Zama. Finally, Scipio Aemilianus salted the ruined harbor. Eastern campaigns annexed Greece and Asia Minor. Julius Caesar subdued Gaul, crossed the Rubicon 49 BCE, and was stabbed beneath Pompey's theater. 44 BCE. After civil wars adopted, Heir Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium 31 BCE and became Augustus, inaugurating 2 centuries of Pax Romana. Imperial calm fostered engineering. Concrete aqueducts arched across valleys, roads radiated from the Miliarium Aureum, and the Colosseum seated 50,000. Yet beneath grandeur, new faiths stirred. In Judea, a census under Augustus drew carpenter Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem. Their son Jesus preached a kingdom of inner righteousness. Roman prefect Pontius Pilate crucified him 30 CE, but followers proclaimed resurrection. Missionary Paul carried the message from Antioch to Athens to Rome, drafting epistles that would anchor the New Testament. Persecution flared. Nero blamed Christians for Rome's Great Fire 64 CE, but spread was inexorable. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine, inspired by a vision at the Milvian Bridge, legalized the faith through the Edict of Milan and convened bishops at Nicaea 325 CE to state that the Son was of one substance with the Father. He refounded Byzantium as Constantinople, cementing an eastern capital closer to frontiers. While Rome embraced a single god, Han China dissolved amid eunuch intrigue and Yellow Turban revolt, or CE. Warlords carved the realm into 3 kingdoms. Buddhism rode caravan paths, offering salvation amid chaos. Far west, Diocletian R. 284–305 attempted to stabilize Rome by tetrarchy and price edict, but taxes, plague, and Germanic pressure mounted. Huns thrust Goths across the Danube. Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE. Finally, in 476 CE, Germanic commander Odoacer deposed boy emperor Romulus Augustulus, sending the imperial regalia to Constantinople and ending the Western Roman Empire. Yet the East, now called Byzantine, thrived under Greek-speaking administrators and formidable walls. Elsewhere, classical light flickered. In India, the Gupta era calculated pi to 5 decimals and formalized 0. Teotihuacan's Avenue of the Dead hosted 70,000 residents. Nazca artists etched desert geoglyphs visible only from sky. Trade still linked worlds. Roman coins reached Vietnam Han silk, wrapped Egyptian mummies, and Madagascan outrigger terms carried Austronesian roots. By 500 CE, iron philosophy, world religions, and continental empires had knit Afro-Eurasia into an interconnected tapestry. Yet collapse in West Rome, fragmentation in China, and migrations across steppe and forest signaled that no order stood forever. The stage was set for medieval faiths, feudal contracts, and nomad thunder to reshape the map once more. When Rome's western crown lay in the dust, its eastern twin, Byzantium, tightened sinews. Emperor Justinian r. 527 to 565 reconquered Italy and North Africa, with General Belisarius, codified Roman jurisprudence into the Corpus Juris Civilis, and crowned Constantinople with the domed Hagia Sophia. Yet plague in 541 halved the population, and Persian wars drained the treasury, foreshadowing pressures still to come. South of those borders, a caravan merchant from Mecca withdrew to a cave, and in 610 heard the angel Jibril recite verses. Muhammad preached monotheism, endured persecution, and in 622 led followers on the Hijra to Medina, launching the Islamic calendar. Within a decade, the united Ummah shattered both Byzantine and Sasanian frontier armies at Yarmouk and Qadisiyah, capturing Jerusalem, Damascus, Ctesiphon, and Egypt. Arabic became the bureaucratic lingua franca. The Rashidun and later Umayyad caliphs struck gold dinars bearing no human image, only Quranic script. Meanwhile, Europe stitched itself together under Germanic warlords. In 496, Frankish king Clovis the teetering at Tolbiac vowed to Christ and won. His baptism linked Frankish swords to Roman clergy. The Benedictine rule, c. 530, turned scattered hermits into disciplined monasteries, copying parchment texts, preserving Latin, while ploughing new fields. In the British Isles, Irish monks lit beacons of scholarship at Iona and Lindisfarne, even as Anglo-Saxon kingdoms Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex contested hegemony. On the Eurasian steppe, the Turks and later the Avars drove Slavic migrants into Byzantine Balkans. In China, the Sui reunited the North-South rift and dug the Grand Canal, but overtaxed peasants rebelled. The mantle passed to the Tang 618 to 907, whose armored horsemen defeated nomads at Talas 751, even while court poets Li Bai and Du Fu distilled frontier hardship into shimmering verse. Paper money, woodblock printing, and civil service examinations hinted at a bureaucratic future unknown in the West. Across the Pacific, Maya scribes inked codices and timed Venus cycles to schedule war, while the great city of Teotihuacan already lay mysteriously abandoned. And in the high Andes, the Moche coated adobe pyramids with warrior frescoes and channeled every drop of El Niño rain. Humanity's center of gravity no longer belonged to a single Mediterranean shore. Multiple civilizations now advanced along parallel tracks. On Christmas Day, 800, Pope Leo III placed a crown on the head of Frankish King Charlemagne inside St. Peter's, reviving a Roman title in exchange for military protection. Carolingian schools standardized minuscule script. Missi Dominici rode circuits to check counts, Yet the realm fractured after Charlemagne's heirs quarreled at Verdun 843. Into that crack streamed raiders Vikings from Scandinavia, Saracen corsairs from Ifriqiya, and Magyar horse archers sweeping the Danube plain, until Otto I crushed them at Lechfeld 955 and forged the Holy Roman Empire. Islamic civilization entered a golden century. The Abbasids shifted power to Baghdad, city of peace, where the Beit al-Hikmah translated Greek, Persian, and Indian manuscripts. Algebra hospitals, astrolabes, and paper spread from Cordoba to Samarkand. In Al-Andalus, musicians perfected the oud, while engineers irrigated orange groves under the shadow of the Great Mosque of Cordoba. But centrifugal forces grew Shia Fatimids in Cairo, Sunni Samanids in Transoxiana, and Turkish mercenaries whose Gilman corps would reshape the map. In China, the Tang dissolved amid eunuch coups, the Song 960 stabilized with gunpowder-propelled rockets, maritime compasses, and 100 million citizens. Commercial taxes on tea and porcelain funded urban theaters and foot-powered silk looms, yet military weakness lurked. To the north, the Khitan Liao and later Jurchen Jin exacted silver ransom, while further on the grasslands a Mongol confederation was coalescing under the banner of a boy named Temujin. Japan borrowed Chinese bureaucracy, then reinterpreted it. The Heian court, 794 to 85, sent envoys east only in poetry. Behind bamboo blinds, noblewomen such as Murasaki Shikibu penned the tale of Genji, the world's first novel. Outside Kyoto, provincial clans raised warrior monks and samurai archers. Their clash birthed the shogunate system. On the Mississippi, mound builders erected 10-story earthen pyramids at Cahokia. Chaco Canyon masons aligned pueblos with solstices. Trans-Saharan trade salt for Ghanaian gold funded the rise of Mali. And on New Zealand-less Polynesian waves, the Lapita diaspora completed humanity's planetary spread, settling Hawaii and Easter Island. Crusading zeal now stirred Europe. When Seljuk Turks seized Jerusalem and hammered Byzantium at Manzikert 1071, Pope Urban II preached Deus Vult at Clermont 1095. Frankish Norman and Provençal barons carved Outremer principalities but struggled to hold them. By 1187, Kurdish general Salah al-Din retook the Holy City after crushing crusaders at Hattin. Richard Lionheart's Third Crusade reclaimed Acre, yet failed at Jerusalem, cementing a stalemate of faiths. Venice, scenting profit, diverted the Fourth Crusade against Constantinople 1204, crippling the empire meant to be Christendom's shield. Out on the steppe, Temujin united warring clans with a simple merit creed. A broken cart makes two men walk. Named Genghis Khan in 1206, he unleashed composite bows and feigned retreat tactics across Eurasia. By the time his grandson Kublai founded the Yuan dynasty, 1271, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to the Carpathians. The Pax Mongolica shuttled diplomats, merchants, and the Venetian Marco Polo along protected caravan trails, while transmitting Persian astronomy to Beijing and Chinese gunpowder to Europe. Yet across those same arteries rode rodents bearing Yersinia pestis. The Black Death erupted in Crimea 1347, and within 5 years killed perhaps 1/3 of Europe, half of China's north, and countless in the Islamic world. Labor scarcity empowered surviving peasants. Villains bargained for wages, weakening feudal bonds. Flagellant cults marched. Some blamed Jews. Yet empiricism crept in as Italian city-states recorded mortality statistics to manage quarantine. Before plague, the Mongol hegemony had already fissured into khanates. Tamerlane rebuilt Samarkand in turquoise tile, then scorched Delhi and Damascus. Soon after the Turkish frontier, Bey Osman carved a principality from Byzantine lands. His descendants captured Bursa, crossed into Europe, and in 1453 Mehmed II's bronze bombards smashed Constantinople's walls, renaming the city Istanbul and ending the thousand-year Byzantine saga. The Ottoman Empire now straddled two continents, controlling spice routes and pressuring a cut-off Christendom to seek new maritime paths. In West Africa, pilgrim king Mansa Musa caravanned to Mecca 1324. With so much gold, he depressed Cairo's dinar value for years, then funded Timbuktu's Sankore University, where jurists debated astronomy by starlight. Across the Pacific, the Aztec Triple Alliance raised Tenochtitlan on Chinampa-laced Lake Texcoco, exacting maize and cacao tribute. Highland Inca engineers stitched the Andes with stone roads and rope bridges, redistributing potatoes and cloth from Quito to Cusco. Europe's intellectual horizons widened. Thomas Aquinas reconciled Aristotle with revelation. Roger Bacon urged experimental method. In 1450, Johannes Gutenberg perfected movable type printing, slashing Bible costs and accelerating idea flow. Portuguese caravels steered by compass, and Latin sail probed Atlantic islands and the Guinea coast, while Chinese eunuch Admiral Zheng He piloted treasure junks to East Africa, demonstrating Ming might yet sparking court debates about silver drain and barbarian influence. Even warfare changed. English bowmen at Crécy 1346 and Agincourt 1415 skewered mailed French knights, foreshadowing the obsolescence of heavy cavalry. Cast-iron cannon breached castle walls. Handheld culverins whispered of future musket lines. Joan of Arc revived French morale before flames at Rouen 1431. Decades later, the Hundred Years' War ended with England expelled save Calais. Spanish kingdoms of Castile and Aragon expelled the last Nasrid emir of Granada in 1492. The same year, Genoese Columbus sailed west under their flag, stitching the last hemispheric gap. By 1500, the medieval world had delivered universities, mechanical clocks, double-entry bookkeeping, and international law. Yet it also bore scars of crusade conquest and pandemic. Gunpowder printing and oceanic navigation were loaded springs about to propel humanity into early modern acceleration and entangle every continent in a single volatile system. When the 15th century closed, three revolutions, printing, gunpowder, and oceanic navigation, were already stirring Europe. Johannes Gutenberg's press cut the cost of a Bible from a monk's year of labor to a month's wages. Cheap pamphlets amplified every disputation, none louder than a German friar who climbed Wittenberg's church steps on 31st October 1517. Martin Luther's 95 Theses denounced indulgence hawking as theft of souls. Overnight woodcut portraits painted him a David slinging scripture at a papal Goliath. The Diet at Worms 1521 branded him heretic. Frederick the Wise hid him in Wartburg Castle, where he translated the New Testament into racy, idiomatic German that common folk could recite at supper. Vernacular Bibles shattered Latin monopoly and prized open questions of authority. Could princes decide their realm's faith? Even before Luther, peninsular monarchs had lit a fuse across the Atlantic. Moorish Granada fell in 1492, freeing Ferdinand and Isabella to back an Italian navigator. Certain Asia lay only weeks westward. Christopher Columbus touched Guanahani, mistook Taino hospitality for Eden, and claimed the Isles for Castile. Within a generation, Hernán Cortés marched from Veracruz, exploited Tlaxcalan resentment against Tenochtitlan, and in 1521 dismantled the Aztec tribute network. Francisco Pizarro repeated the formula in Peru, seizing Atahualpa at Cajamarca 1532, with 168 men, cannon shock, and steel blade. Behind the swords rode pathogens, smallpox, measles, influenza, to which American immune systems had no memory. Whole provinces vanished before Spanish horsemen arrived in sight. Plundered bullion flooded Seville's Casa de Contratación, widening Europe's money supply and spurring price inflation, known as the Spanish rise of prices. Silver from Potosi financed the Habsburg bid for continental primacy, underwriting Charles V's wars against France and the Ottomans, and subsidizing counter-Reformation zeal. Yet silver also, Manila galleons ferried it to Ming China, where bureaucrats had decreed taxes payable in the metal. Global trade had become a ring road. Spanish pesos stamped with the Pillars of Hercules circulated from Amsterdam, counting houses, to Fujian tea markets. Portugal, smaller but earlier at sea, carved a pepper empire round the Cape of Good Hope. Vasco da Gama dropped anchor at Calicut in 1498. A decade later, Afonso de Albuquerque cannoned his way into Goa, Malacca, and Hormuz, fortifying each strait with stone and carrack. Their caravel technology, triangular lateen sails, and sternpost rudders out-tacked monsoon dhows. Yet conquest was lean. Fewer than 10,000 Portuguese controlled an ocean chiefly through chained duty posts and cartaz licenses that taxed every spice bale. Back home, the High Renaissance reached zenith. Between 1501 and 1519, Leonardo da Vinci layered smoky sfumato on the Mona Lisa, while Michelangelo peeled marble from the David and frescoed a Sistine Cosmos, where Adam lifts a languid hand toward God. Niccolò Machiavelli, sacked by Medici partisans, distilled Florentine back-alley realism into Il Principe 1513. It is safer to be feared than loved. The appearance of virtue counts more than its practice. Italian city-states styled themselves antiques, reborn. Merchant oligarchs wore togas at carnival, but foreign infantry increasingly decided peninsula politics, first French Valois, then Spanish tercios, with their 16-foot pikes and arquebuses. North of the Alps, Erasmus of Rotterdam penned humanist satires demanding inner piety over ritual. Painter Albrecht Dürer crossed the Brenner Pass and fused northern detail with Italian proportion. In England, Thomas More imagined utopia, even as Henry VIII's marital angst birthed the Church of England, 1534. Dissolution of monasteries shifted 10% of English land into gentry hands, financing enclosure sheep herding and a rising parliament that would one day challenge kings. Beyond Europe, Islamic empires flowered. Suleiman the Magnificent, 1520 to 1566, ruled the Ottoman Crescent from Buda to Basra. Janissary corps paid from Anatolian tax farms wielded matchlock muskets in locking step volleys. Siege engineers cast the great Turkish bombard. Naval captain Hayreddin Barbarossa turned the Mediterranean into an Ottoman lake. Eastward Persian Safavids under Shah Ismail imposed Twelver Shi'ism, setting a sectarian boundary still visible on modern maps, while in Hindustan Babur's arquebus lines broke Rajput elephants, at Panipat 1526 founding the Mughal dynasty, whose grandson Akbar would debate Jesuits in Fatehpur Sikri and tax harvests in measured silver rather than forced tribute. Farther east, Ming China basked in porcelain brilliance, yet faced fiscal strain from coastal pirates and steppe raids. Scholar official Wang Yangming preached innate conscience. Artisans coated Jingdasian bowls in cobalt glaze for Iberian tables. In Japan, civil war raged among daimyo lords, until Oda Nobunaga field-tested Portuguese muskets at Nagashino 1575. His successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, froze social mobility, samurai must leave plows, and dreamt of invading China. But Korean turtle ships scorched his fleet. After his death, Tokugawa Ieyasu triumphed at Sekigahara. 1600 closed ports to most foreigners and imposed 2 centuries of relative peace. Violence still churned Europe. Protestant England repelled the Spanish Armada 1588. France bled through 8 wars of religion, until Henry IV's Edict of Nantes 1598 tolerated Huguenots. Dutch rebels inspired by Calvin and commerce breached low country dikes to drown Habsburg cavalry founding the Dutch Republic, whose wind-powered sawmills soon cranked out timber for the greatest merchant fleet yet seen. The 17th century opened in scientific and spiritual ferment. Johannes Kepler's Astronomia Nova, 1609, described planetary ellipses. Galileo Galilei turned a spyglass upward, mapping lunar craters and Jupiter's moons, only to kneel before the Inquisition in 1633, murmuring, "Eppur si muove." Across the Channel, Francis Bacon championed inductive reasoning, while René Descartes, in Utrecht, insisted the thinking self formed reality's only certainty. Printing houses from Leiden to London poured out almanacs splicing astrology with logarithms. Coffeehouse debates replaced wine-soaked tavern brawls, sharpening a public sphere that questioned both dogma and crown. But theology still fired cannon. When Bohemian nobles tossed Habsburg envoys from Prague castle windows, defenestration, 1618, the 30 Years' War ignited. Imperial tercios, Swedish mobile artillery under Gustavus Adolphus, and French subsidies under Cardinal Richelieu reduced Central Europe to ash. Famine and marauding killed perhaps a fifth of German souls. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648, birthed modern sovereignty. Each prince could choose Catholic, Lutheran, or Calvinist worship. And external powers would respect borders, a revolutionary notion, soon exported worldwide through diplomacy and colonization. England, meanwhile, slid into constitutional crisis. Charles I, clinging to divine right, quarreled with a tax-wielding parliament. Civil war erupted 1642, pitting royalist cavaliers against Oliver Cromwell's new model army, drilled on merit rather than birth. After Marston Moor and Nasibi Parliament tried and beheaded the king, 1649, signaling that rulers like subjects could face law. The Republic proved brittle. Within a decade, monarchy returned under Charles II, yet the precedent remained: sovereignty flowed from nation to crown, not reverse. Across the Atlantic, colonial webs thickened. Spaniards extended mission chains into New Mexico. French coureurs de bois bartered beaver pelts along the St. Lawrence. Puritan families settled Massachusetts Bay, 1630, seeking Zion in the wilderness, then founded Harvard College to teach Greek and guard orthodoxy. Plantation slavery, embryonic in Hispaniola's sugar fields, metastasized when Portuguese traders ferried captive Congolese to Brazilian engenhos. The Atlantic triangular trade took shape: textiles and guns to Africa, human lives to the Americas, molasses and tobacco to Europe. By 1700, over 6 million Africans had crossed the Middle Passage, reshaping demography and resistance alike. In West Africa itself, new states flourished on gunpowder for captives exchange. Oyo cavalry wielded imported horses. Dahome's Mino women formed elite regiments. Further east, Ethiopian Emperor Susenyos III flirted with Catholicism, provoking revolt, while Oman expelled Portuguese garrisons from Muscat and carved a Swahili littoral empire reaching Zanzibar. Asia too felt European magnetism. The Dutch seized Portuguese Malacca, 1641, monopolized nutmeg in the Banda Islands by genocide, then founded Batavia on Java. They besieged Spanish Manila with mixed success, but snatched Ceylon cinnamon from candy. The English East India Company chartered 1,600, erected modest factories at Surat and Madras, nursing ambitions, dwarfed only by available capital. Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan levied 100 million subjects to build the marble Taj Mahal, completed 1648. Yet his son, Aurangzeb's orthodox zeal taxed Hindus and militarized Deccan fronts, draining treasuries that Europeans would later exploit. Intellectually, Europe leapt again. Isaac Newton synthesized Keplerian heavens and Galileo's falling apples into universal gravitation, Principia 1687 crowning the scientific revolution. John Locke sketched natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Baruch Spinoza dissolved miracle into nature's immanent law. In salons of Paris, Madame de Rambouillet hosted conversations that seeded the Enlightenment. Yet absolutist courts simultaneously rose. Louis XIV of France centralized nobles in Versailles' mirrored halls, waged wars from the Rhine to Catalonia, and proclaimed «L'État, c'est moi». In the East, Peter the Great toured Dutch shipyards, incognito dragged Muscovite boyars into Western dress, founded St. Petersburg 1703 on marshland, and forced Baltic access at Sweden's expense. As 1700 dawned, world population neared 600 million, half of whom were tethered in forced or hereditary labor. Oceans stitched continents into a single commercial system. Telescopes expanded cosmos, while microscopes revealed unimagined life. Yet behind polished lenses lurked powder warehouses ready to fire the next century's empires and revolutions. Humanity stood on the threshold of industrial power, its old certainties cracking like ice before spring floods. Europe entered the 18th century wielding instruments that measured the heavens and mortgaged the future. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1713, began when childless Charles II died. Louis XIV backed grandson Philip V, while England, the Dutch Republic, and Austria feared Bourbon hegemony. Marlborough's infantry squares and Prince Eugene's cavalry broke French lines at Blenheim and Ramillies. The Treaty of Utrecht, 1713, traded territory for stability. Britain took Gibraltar and Asiento rights to ship slaves into Spanish America. Austria gained the Spanish Netherlands. France kept a Bourbon on Madrid's throne but renounced dynastic union. A new balance of power diplomacy, soon dubbed the European concert, emerged. Behind armies stood credit. London's Bank of England, 1694, issued paper notes backed by parliamentary taxes. Amsterdam's exchange stabilized bills of trade across 4 oceans. In 1717, the South Sea Company promised bondholders Latin American riches. Share prices ballooned tenfold, then collapsed in 1720, mirrored by John Law's Mississippi bubble in France. Legislators learned a painful axiom of modern finance: speculative contagion can bankrupt states faster than armies. Meanwhile, barometers and logarithmic tables rewrote natural philosophy. Isaac Newton, now master of the mint, corresponded with Gottfried Leibniz over calculus priority, while disciples debated optics in London's Royal Society. In 1735, Swedish astronomer Linnaeus codified binomial nomenclature, taming the teeming plant world into Latin order. In 1738, Swiss mathematician Daniel Bernoulli solved fluid pressure, a theorem soon applied to pumps, muskets, and the heart's ventricles. Coffeehouses, penny entry clubs redolent of Java beans, and newsprint multiplied from Oxford's Queen's Lane to Istanbul's Tahtakal. There, merchants swapped prices of Bengal silk, Boston molasses, and Baltic timber, while pamphleteers recited Joseph Addison's secular essays on civic virtue. In Leipzig, Johann Sebastian Bach stitched Lutheran chorales into counterpointed masses. In Venice, Antonio Vivaldi sold concertos to visitors on the Grand Tour, turning court music into transnational commodity. Ideas crossed oceans as easily as Ledger's Jesuit astronomers in Beijing presented Kangxi with Euclid. Newtonian translations seeped into Kyoto Rangaku Dutch learning circles, unsettling Neo-Confucian certainty. Imperial borders likewise blurred. Peter the Great, after crushing Charles XII at Poltava 1709, founded maritime St. Petersburg and obliged boyars to shave beards. The Qing, under Kangxi and Yongzheng, subdued Dzungar nomads, annexed Tibet, and allowed Western missionaries only within Guangzhou's 13 factories. In India, the Maratha Confederacy raided Mughal tribute routes, while Omani sloops contested Portuguese forts along East Africa. By mid-century, commerce connected Canton financiers to Cadiz silver brokers and Boston shipwrights, an integrated system primed for conflict. The War of the Austrian Succession ended with the 1748 Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, but its embers smoldered. Pragmatic sanction or not, Frederick II of Prussia kept Silesia proving oblique. Oboe-playing kings could mobilize lightning columns and iron ramrods as effectively as old dynasties. Across the Channel, Britain's industrial enlightenment gathered pace. In 1764, James Hargreaves' spinning jenny multiplied thread output. 2 years later, James Watt patented a separate condenser steam engine, converting coal seams into mechanical horsepower. Lancashire cottages sprouted water frames and soot, darkened workshop rafters, humble auguries of a mechanized century. Farther west, another commodity altered lives: cotton. Slave-tilled Sea Island staples fed Lancashire looms. In return, printed calicos sailed back to West African ports, where brokers such as the Efik and Itsakiri exchanged cloth and muskets for enslaved captives from Nigeria's interior wars. The Middle Passage killed 1 in 7, yet annual embarkations climbed above 80,000 by the 1770s. The economic gears of empire meshed flesh, fiber, and finance with pitiless precision. On the Ohio frontier, Virginians in deerskin leggings clashed with French coureurs de bois. A skirmish led by 22-year-old George Washington at Jumonville Glen, 1754, sparked the global 7 Years' War. Britain and Prussia squared off against France, Austria, Russia, and Spain on 5 continents. In India, Robert Clive bribed Nawab generals and deployed line volleys at Plassey, 1757, granting the East India Company revenue rights over Bengal's 20 million peasants. On the Plains of Abraham, 1759, Generals Wolfe and Montcalm both fell, but Quebec City changed flags. By 1763, the Treaty of Paris ceded Canada and colonial Florida to Britain. France kept sugar-rich Guadeloupe, a tacit concession that cane outvalued furs. Victory bred costs. Redcoats now guarded a doubled North American frontier. London's national debt reached £133 million. Chancellor George Grenville sought revenue through the Stamp Act, 1765, and Townshend duties on paper, tea, and glass. Colonial assemblies cried no taxation without representation, and smuggled Dutch tea while pamphleteers from James Otis in Massachusetts to Patrick Henry in Virginia invoked Locke's contract theory. In 1770, nervous sentries outside Boston's Customs House fired into a snowball-throwing crowd in flaming rhetoric of tyranny. Yet London repealed most taxes, misjudging the depth of ideological shift. Across the Atlantic, new philosophies germinated. Denis Diderot's Encyclopédie, 1751 to 1772, gathered 71,000 articles on reason and craft. Voltaire mocked clerical absolutism. Montesquieu proposed separated powers. Jean-Jacques Rousseau exalted the general will. Salons hosted by Madame Geoffrin and Suzanne Necker blended noble lineage with bourgeois critique, while Freemason lodges ritualized enlightenment in candle-lit oaths. Monarchs flirted with enlightened despotism. Frederick II abolished torture. Catherine the Great corresponded with Diderot, yet crushed Pugachev's Cossack revolt. Joseph II freed Austrian serfs and played Mozart quartets, but faced Hungarian rebellion. Change approached from below faster than from above. The Qianlong Emperor, celebrating 10 triumphant campaigns, told King George III's envoy in 1793 that China lacked no product of your country. Yet the Macartney mission's very arrival revealed shifting currents. European ships now carried chronometers and flintlock carronades. In West Africa, Usman Dan Fodio preached reform that would birth the Sokoto Caliphate, while New Zealand's Maori iwi integrated muskets traded for flax. None of these tremors yet equaled the ideological earthquake gathering in Britain's Atlantic seaboard colonies. Musket smoke over Lexington Green. April 1775 signaled that debate had ripened into war. Militias harried redcoat columns back to Boston. Thomas Paine's Common Sense sold 120,000 copies in 6 months, translating Locke into rousing prose. On 4 July 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted Thomas Jefferson's declaration, "All men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights." France, seeking revenge for the 7 years' humiliation, funneled muskets and fleet support through Comte de Rochambeau and Admiral de Grasse. Their convergence trapped Cornwallis at Yorktown 1781. The Treaty of Paris 1783 recognized the United States. A republic without hereditary titles took its place in global affairs, testing whether Enlightenment theory could govern sprawling territory. The ideological spark leapt south. Enslaved preacher Buchmann and visionary Duty Louverture led Saint-Domingue's sugar plantation workers in revolt. 1791. French commissioners, desperate to hold the colony, abolished slavery. 1794. Toussaint, now Louverture, drove out the British and Spaniards, drafting an autonomous constitution under nominal French sovereignty. Napoleon later tried to restore slavery. Yellow fever and guerrilla resistance crushed his expedition, leading to Haiti's independence, 1804, the first Black Republic, and a warning to slave societies across the hemisphere. In Europe, fiscal meltdown spurred the French Revolution. War debt and failed harvests obliged Louis XVI to summon the Estates General, May 1789. The Third Estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly, swore the tennis court oath, and sparked peasant uprisings that culminated with the Bastille's fall. 14th July. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen enshrined liberty, property, and resistance to oppression. Emigration of nobles, currency collapse, and war against Austria and Prussia radicalized the movement. By 1793, the convention executed the king and queen. Maximilien Robespierre's Committee of Public Safety unleashed the Reign of Terror, guillotining 17,000 enemies. Yet the revolution also drafted Europe's first mass conscript army. The levée en masse furnished 800,000 soldiers who beat coalition monarchies at Fleurus 1794. Amid chaos, a 26-year-old artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte suppressed a royalist uprising with a whiff of grapeshot. 1795 gained command in Italy, and by 1799 overthrew the Directory, promising order under the consulate. Within months, he codified civil law, reopened Catholic churches, and planned Egyptian and Channel invasions. Enlightenment's promise of rational liberty thus morphed into charismatic autocracy, foreshadowing the imperial century ahead. Revolutionary reverberations spread. Polish patriots under Tadeusz Kościuszko rose in 1794, but were crushed by partitioning powers. Irish United Men attempted republican revolt, 1798, only to meet British cannon at Vinegar Hill. In South America, Francisco de Miranda toured salons from Paris to Philadelphia, plotting Gran Colombia's liberation. Liberals from Caracas to Cadiz digested translated decrees, while enslaved Africans whispered Haiti's tale. The Atlantic had become an ideological gyre, circulating muskets, sugar, and constitutions. Science marched beneath the drums. Antoine Lavoisier named oxygen and hydrogen before dying on the guillotine. The Republic needs neither savants nor chemists. Alessandro Volta stacked zinc and copper discs into the first battery. William Herschel discovered infrared radiation. Edward Jenner pioneered smallpox vaccination, foreshadowing public health revolutions. The same decade saw Eli Whitney's cotton gin, 1793, multiply fiber output, locking the young United States deeper into plantation slavery, even as its founding documents extolled freedom. Contradictions of Enlightenment would demand future reckonings. As 1800 dawned, the world's political atlas had been redrawn by rebellion and war, its intellectual atlas by reason and experiment. Monarchs still reigned from Lisbon to Beijing, yet subjects everywhere possessed new arguments, and increasingly the musket drill to challenge birthright power. The thermodynamic engine, the Declaration's creed, and the guillotine's shadow marched in uneasy tandem toward the next century's industrial empires and nationalist storms. The Napoleonic convulsions ended at the Congress of Vienna, 1814–15, where Metternich and Castlereagh agreed that equilibrium, not liberty, would keep Europe quiet. Yet beneath red-coated diplomacy, furnaces already roared. In the English Midlands, ironmaster Abraham Darby's coke-fired blast furnaces met James Watt's rotary steam engine. Paired with Richard Trevithick's high-pressure boiler, they created the locomotive. When George Stephenson's rocket hissed down the Liverpool-Manchester line in 1830, at 45 km/h, investors understood that rails could collapse distance the way printing had collapsed ignorance. Coal and cotton intertwined. Eli Whitney's gin, 1793, fed Manchester mills. The Factory Act, 1833, limited child labor, but confirmed wage discipline. Cities swelled. London passed 1 million souls. Sooty chimneys made the great stink. 1858, that prodded Joseph Bazalgette to tunnel sewers beneath the Thames. In France, Jacques Daguerre fixed light on silver plates. In Germany, Justus von Liebig analyzed nitrogen and foresaw chemical fertilizer. In Russia, Tsar Alexander I hesitated, but his serfs whispered rumors of English wages. The New Age minted new ideologies. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels watched spinning jennies from a Manchester garret and published The Communist Manifesto, 1848. History was class struggle. Proletarians had only chains to lose. Meanwhile, aristocrats mouthed nationhood. Greek rebels, aided by Lord Byron, and Egyptian warships shattered Ottoman galleys at Navarino, 1827, and won independence. Giuseppe Mazzini's Young Italy plotted a peninsula without Habsburg garrisons. Friedrich List demanded German customs union. Anti-imperial tremors also rocked Asia. The Opium Wars, 1839–42, 1856–60, broke Qing autonomy. HMS Nemesis's riveted hull breezed up the Pearl River, and the Treaty of Nanjing ceded Hong Kong. Inside China, Hakka mystic Hong Xiuquan proclaimed himself Christ's younger brother. His Taiping Heavenly Kingdom captured Nanjing and cost 20 million lives before regional armies under Zheng Guofan and Li Hongzhang crushed it, 1864. Across the Pacific, the United States embodied both expansion and contradiction. The Louisiana Purchase, 1803, doubled its territory. Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act forced Choctaw and Cherokee west on the Trail of Tears. Cotton profits deepened slavery until abolitionist and planter states collided. The Civil War, 1861–65, pitted rifled muskets and telegraph-guided logistics against antebellum harness drills. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation reframed the conflict around human bondage. 4 years and some 750,000 deaths later, the Union survived, slavery died, and industrial output had migrated from mills to mass production armories. Europe's revolutionary wave of 1848 failed to topple thrones, but seeded future borders. In Italy, Count Cavour leveraged French cannon at Solferino, 1859, while guerrilla hero Giuseppe Garibaldi swept Sicily with 1,000 red shirts. By 1870, Rome joined a unified kingdom of Italy. In Germany, Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck used blood and iron victory over Denmark, 1864. Austria Königgrätz, 1866, and Napoleon III at Sedan, 1870, forged the German Empire in Versailles' Hall of Mirrors. A continental center of coal chemistry and Krupp artillery emerged overnight. Science galloped alongside politics. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, 1859, introduced natural selection. Louis Pasteur's germ theory, 1860s, inspired antiseptic surgery. James Clerk Maxwell, unified electricity and magnetism. 1864. Dmitry Mendeleev arranged the periodic table, 1869. Such findings bolstered progress faith, but also social Darwinist distortions that served empire. At Philadelphia's Centennial Exposition, 1876, crowds gasped at Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. A decade later, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison dueled over alternating versus direct current in the War of Currents. Beyond Europe, reforms raced to resist dominance. After Commodore Matthew Perry's black ships coerced trade, 1853–54, Japan's Meiji Restoration. 1868, abolished samurai stipends, built railways, mandated conscription, and copied German constitutional models. In 1894, Meiji warships sank Qing fleets at the Yalu. Peace delivered Taiwan and Korea, announcing Asia's first industrial power. Ottoman statesman Mustafa Rashid Pasha issued the Tanzimat Edicts, 1839–76, promising equal taxation and secular courts, but fiscal dependency deepened. Egypt's Khedive Ismail financed Suez Canal shares 1869 with European loans. British troops occupied Cairo 1882 to secure passage to India. In West Africa, Samuel Ajayi Crowther translated the Bible into Yoruba, while Algerian Emir Abd al-Qadir waged guerrilla war against French column squares. During the scramble for Africa, 1884–1900, European diplomats gathered at Berlin in 1884–85, drawing borders on maps where no explorer had set foot. King Leopold II claimed the Congo as personal estate, enforcing rubber quotas. With the Chikota whip, perhaps 10 million perished. Cecil Rhodes envisioned a Cape to Cairo telegraph. His chartered company annexed Mashonaland 1890 and named it Rhodesia. Meanwhile, Ethiopia's Emperor Menelik II imported Italian rifles, and at Adwa 1896, routed a European army, preserving the kingdom's sovereignty. Imperial competition reached the Arctic and Pacific. Russia's Trans-Siberian Railway bridged 11 time zones. America seized Hawaii 1898 and crushed Spain in Manila Bay, and Santiago de Cuba, taking Puerto Rico and the Philippines. In Australia, gold rushes birthed modern Melbourne. New Zealand extended voting to women 1893. Migrant labor wove continent's Indian Girmitia, worked Fijian cane Chinese coolies, laid U.S. rails, and Italian navies tunneled through Swiss Alps. London by 1900 hosted more Irish than Dublin, and more Jews than any city except New York and Warsaw. After 1870, a second industrial revolution exploited electricity, petroleum, and scientific R&D. Henry Ford's assembly line, 1908, turned Model T chassis every 93 minutes. German firms Bayer and BASF synthesized aniline dyes and aspirin. American Standard Oil under John D. Rockefeller refined 90% of the world's kerosene. Steel output soared. Bessemer and Siemens Martin furnaces let Alfred Krupp forge 88-ton coastal guns. Andrew Carnegie's Pittsburgh mills birthed skyscraper girders, and the 1892 Homestead Strike highlighting industrial labor's bargaining power. Marx's ghost materialized in mass politics. The First International 1864 collapsed under anarchist Marxist quarrels, but the Second International 1889 rallied 1 million workers every 1st in May. Russian Narodniks assassinated Tsar Alexander II, 1881. His grandson Nicholas II granted a Duma only after the 1905 revolution sparked, when sailors on battleship Potemkin mutinied and troops fired on a Petersburg procession. In Britain, the Fabian Society and newly founded Labour Party agitated for pensions. In the U.S., Haymarket 1886 and the Pullman Strike 1894 tested Gilded Age plutocracy. Transport and communication minimized the planet. Submarine telegraph cables, first 1866, let financiers arbitrage gold between Bombay and London in hours. The Panama Canal diggers, led by Ferdinand de Lesseps at first, and later the U.S. Army Corps, dynamited Culebra Cut. Wilbur and Orville Wright lifted heavier-than aircraft at Kitty Hawk, 1903. Photography became motion, the Lumiere brothers projected. La Sortie de Lucine 1795's Hollywood citrus groves awaited. Athletics turned global with the revived Olympic Games, 1896. Geopolitics hardened into alliance blocs. Bismarck's dismissal, 1890, ended his cautious balancing. Kaiser Wilhelm II embarked on Weltpolitik, building dreadnoughts and accepting a place in the sun. Britain responded with HMS Dreadnought, 1906, all big gun and turbine fast, resetting naval parity. The Triple Entente. Britain, France, Russia faced the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. In the Balkans, Slavic nationalism, stoked by Serbia and feared by Vienna, festered after the Bosnian crisis 1908 and Balkan Wars 1912-13. Science kept pace with wonders and terrors alike. Max Planck's quantum hypothesis 1900 and Albert Einstein's special relativity 1905 fractured classical certainty. Sigmund Freud mapped the unconscious. Marie Curie isolated radium. Ernest Rutherford fired alpha particles through gold foil and glimpsed the atom's nucleus. Art echoed Upheaval, Van Gogh's swirling stars, Picasso's Cubist Demoiselles, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring Riot, 1913. As 1914 approached, visitors to the Panama Pacific International Exposition marveled at diesel engines and incandescent boulevards. Yet newspapers brimmed with anarchist bombs, suffragette hunger strikes, and lynchings in the American South. Empires commanded 90% of Earth's land, but their subjects possessed telegraphs, rifles, and manifestos of self-determination. All the tinder of modernity lay stacked. A spark waited at Sarajevo. On the 28th June 1914, a Bosnian Serb student fired 2 pistol shots in Sarajevo, killing Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Vienna's ultimatum to Serbia triggered entangled alliances. Germany backed Austria-Hungary. Russia mobilized for Serbia. France honored Russia. Britain joined after German troops violated Belgian neutrality. Industrial warfare erupted along 2 fronts. At Tannenberg, 1914, German rail coordination annihilated Russia's Second Army. At the Marne, taxis raced French reserves to stop a Schlieffen pincer, freezing the Western Front into barbed wire trenches stretching 700 kilometers from the North Sea to the Swiss border. Artillery outweighed maneuver Verdun's 60 million shells. 1916 turned hills into moonscape. The Somme first day killed 19,000 British soldiers. Chlorine drifted at Ypres. Tanks introduced by Britain 1916 crept 5 kilometers an hour, yet foreshadowed armored breakthroughs. At sea, the Royal Navy's blockade starved Germany of nitrates, while U-boats sank tonnage from Liverpool to Cape Hatteras. German resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare, and the Zimmermann telegram pushed isolationist America into war. April 1917. Meanwhile, the Eastern Front imploded. Tsarist offensives melted amid frost and famine. In March 1917, bread riots in Petrograd toppled Nicholas II. Bolshevik slogans, "Peace, Breadland," galvanized workers and soldiers. Lenin's April theses demanded all power to Soviets. The October Revolution installed a radical government that soon ceded vast territory to Germany via Brest-Litovsk, 1918. With fresh American troops, the Allies launched the 100 Days Offensive. Ludendorff's final gamble, stormtrooper infiltration to the Marne, failed. On April 11th of November 1918, Germany signed an armistice in Compiègne Forest. The Great War cost roughly 17 million lives, shattered empires. Habsburg, Romanov, Ottoman, Hohenzollern, and birthed fragile republics from the Baltic to Anatolia. The Versailles Treaty, imposed reparations and the War Guilt Clause, while Wilson's League of Nations promised collective security but lacked U.S. membership. Redrawn borders created minorities eager for revision. Influenza, misnamed Spanish, killed perhaps another 50 million, striking hardest where rations were scarcest. Post-war economies lurched. Weimar Germany printed marks to pay striking Ruhr workers. By November 1923, a loaf cost $200 billion. In the U.S. Roaring Twenties, assembly lines churned Model T Ford's radios broadcast jazz, and stocks soared on margin. Crash came. On Black Thursday, 24 1929. Global trade collapsed by 2/3, commodity prices halved, and unemployment reached 30% in many nations. Governments responded with tariffs or social welfare. Only the Soviet Union's 5-year plans appeared to grow at brutal human cost. Liberal democracy staggered, making room for extremist certainties. Economic despair and wounded pride lifted authoritarians. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's blackshirts marched on Rome 1922. In Germany, Adolf Hitler transformed the Nazi fringe into the Reich's ruling party, preaching Lebensraum and anti-Semitism. Rearmament breached Versailles. The West appeased at Munich 1938, while Hitler annexed Sudetenland and absorbed Czechoslovakia. In August 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact stunned diplomats, dividing Poland between Berlin and Moscow. 2 weeks after Wehrmacht invasion, Sept. Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. Blitzkrieg combined. Stuka dive bombers, panzer wedges, and radio to paralyze opponents. Poland fell in 28 days. Denmark in 6 hours. France in 6 weeks. Britain, rescued at Dunkirk, endured the Blitz, while RAF Spitfires won the Battle of Britain, proving air superiority could shield an island nation. In the east, the USSR seized the Baltics and repelled a bloody Finnish winter war. On 22 June 1941, Operation Barbarossa unleashed 3 million Axis troops across 800 kilometers of frontier. Soviet losses were staggering: 3 million prisoners by December, but scorched earth retreat, Siberian reinforcements, and the Rasputitsa mud stalled Germans before Moscow. Siege encircled Leningrad for 872 days. 1 million civilians perished. In Asia, the Japanese Empire had marched through Manchuria 1931 and coastal China 1937, seeking resources impeded by U.S. embargo. Admiral Yamamoto struck Pearl Harbor 7. Deck. 1941, propelling America into a global two-front campaign. Japanese forces seized the Philippines, Malaya, and Burma, but at Midway, June 1942, U.S. dive bombers sank 4 carriers, shifting Pacific initiative. Allied industry outproduced Axis stocks, Liberty ships every 4 days, T-34 tanks from evacuated Urals plants, B-24 Liberators hourly in Michigan. Codebreakers, Ultra at Bletchley Magic, at Pearl, read enemy signals. The Holocaust mechanized murder Einsatzgruppen shootings evolved into gas chambers at Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. By 1945, 2/3 of Europe's 9 million Jews were dead, alongside Romani, disabled, and dissenters. Turning points piled: Stalingrad, Feb. 1943, trapped the German Sixth Army. El Alamein and Torch pushed Axis from North Africa. Kursk, July 1943, saw 6,000 Chuz tanks clash in history's largest armored battle, ending German offensive capacity. The Allies invaded Italy 1943 and France on D-Day, 6 June 1944. Soviet armies stormed Berlin. Hitler shot himself, 31 April 1945. Germany capitulated 8th May 1945. Across the globe, the Manhattan Project harnessed uranium and plutonium. On 6 August 1945, a single bomb over Hiroshima killed 70,000 instantly. Nagasaki followed. Japan surrendered 2nd September. World War II left 60–70 million dead-raised cities, yet also birthed the United Nations Bretton Woods institutions and a superpower duopoly between Washington and Moscow. Europe's ashes cooled into ideological fault lines. At Fulton 1946, Winston Churchill spoke of an Iron Curtain. The U.S. adopted containment George Kennan, and the Truman Doctrine funded anti-communist regimes. The Marshall Plan poured $13 billion into Western reconstruction, while Soviet satellite states followed 5-year plans under Comecon. In 1948, Berlin's western sectors starved under blockade until an airlift landed supplies every 3 minutes for 11 months. NATO 1949 and the Warsaw Pact 1955 formalized armed camps. Decolonization quickened. India won independence 1947, but partition killed 1 million and displaced 15. Indonesia defeated Dutch reoccupation 1949. Vietnam beat France at Dien Bien Phu 1954, setting the stage for U.S. involvement. Across Africa, the Gold Coast became Ghana 1957. Algeria's FLN War 1954–62 cost 500,000 lives. The Congo's chaotic 1960 independence foretold Cold War proxy struggles. Meanwhile, nuclear arms raced. The USSR tested an A-bomb 1949. Hydrogen devices followed. October 1957, Sputnik beeped over Kansas, igniting the space race. NASA's Apollo 11 landed Neil Armstrong on the Moon 1969, even as quagmire in Vietnam eroded American trust. Cuban exiles failed at the Bay of Pigs 1961. Khrushchev then stationed missiles in Cuba, leading to the 1962 missile crisis. 13 days when Mahdi Mutual assured destruction held breath before a secret Turkey for Cuba compromise. Society reshaped itself. In the U.S., Brown v. Board 1954 outlawed school segregation. Rosa Parks's bus stand 1955 and Dr. King's marches led to the Civil Rights Act. 1964. France's May 1968 protests, Prague's brief spring crushed by Soviet tanks, and China's Cultural Revolution 1966–76 each questioned authority. Second wave feminism, environmentalism, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring 1962, and rock music globalized dissent. Economically, the 30 Glorious Years, 1945–75, delivered welfare states, Japanese keiretsu, and European integration, ECSC, 1951, to European Economic Community, 1957. OPEC's 1973 oil embargo shattered complacency. Stagflation and deregulation followed. Computing miniaturized from transistor 1947 to microchip 1958. ARPANET sent its first packet 1969, while DNA's double helix Watson and Crick 1953 inaugurated biotech. The Cold War thawed in oscillations, détente treaties, then Afghan invasion 1979. Reagan's Star Wars solidarity strikes in Poland. Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika tried to salvage Soviet legitimacy, but instead opened floodgates. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Satellite regimes held first free elections. On 26 December 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved into 15 republics. A unipolar moment dawned, yet ethnic wars in Yugoslavia and Rwanda highlighted that ideological bipolarity had masked older fissures rather than resolved them. By 1991, the world was linked by jumbo jets, satellite TV, and credit card networks. Population reached 5.3 billion. Life expectancy had risen 30 years since 1900, yet nuclear arsenals could still annihilate civilization. The stage was set for an information revolution that would compress distance even further while exposing every society to shockwaves in real time. When the red banner came down over the Kremlin On 25 December 1991, pundits hailed an end of history. The United States stood alone with half the planet's GDP and unrivaled carrier groups. NATO absorbed former Warsaw Pact states. The European Union signed the Maastricht Treaty 1992 and launched the Euro 1999 binding markets from Lisbon to Helsinki. In Asia, a revitalized China guided by Deng Xiaoping's slogan to get rich is glorious, welcomed foreign factories into Shenzhen and Pudong. Container ports and just-in-time logistics stitched the globe into a single production web. Uzbek cotton spun in Bangladesh, dyed in Guangdong, sewn in Vietnam, retailed online in Chicago. Digital pulses replaced steam whistles. Tim Berners-Lee released the World Wide Web 1991 soon. Mosaic Browser 1993 let hyperlinks leap continents. Silicon Valley's .com gold rush minted titans. Amazon 1994 sold books. Google's PageRank 1998 organized the world's information. And Facebook 2004 monetized friendship by the click. Fiber optic cables lit up like auroras. Mobile phones shrank from bricks to Nokia candy bars, then exploded into the iPhone 2007, placing a supercomputer in every palm. Yet unipolar triumph harbored shadows. In the Balkans, Yugoslavia's breakup unleashed ethnic cleansing. NATO airstrikes halted Serb artillery at Sarajevo 1995 and ended Kosovo's expulsion 1999. Rwanda's 100-day genocide 1994 slaughtered 800,000 with machetes while peacekeepers watched. Humanitarian intervention became doctrine until Somalia's Black Hawk Down 1993 cautioned against mission creep. Middle Eastern alignments shifted under American hegemony. The Oslo Accords 1993 promised a two-state solution, but stalled. Sanctions starved Ba'athist Iraq, while UN inspectors hunted weapons of mass destruction. On 11 September 2001, 4 hijacked airliners turned Manhattan steel into ash, killing nearly 3,000 and jolting the global psyche. George W. Bush declared a war on terror, toppling Afghanistan's Taliban 2001 and Saddam Hussein 2003. The lightning victory in Baghdad devolved into sectarian insurgency. Leaked Abu Ghraib photos and drone strikes questioned the moral cost of preventive war. Meanwhile, Russia under Vladimir Putin, elected 2000, regained footing with oil and gas revenues. Chechen separatists were crushed, oligarchs tamed. In 2008, Russia invaded Georgia's breakaway provinces. NATO expansion paused, but energy pipelines whispered leverage. Finance mirrored geopolitics, lightly regulated derivatives piled upon U.S. subprime mortgages until Lehman Brothers collapsed. 15 September 2008. The global financial crisis erased $2 trillion in weeks, prompting stimulus and quantitative easing. Occupy Wall Street tents decried the 1% haul. China's export engine cushioned Asia, signaling a power shift from Atlantic to Pacific. Science reimagined life. In 2003, the Human Genome Project sequenced 20,000 genes. CRISPR-Cas9 2012 promised cut-and-paste heredity. Kyoto Protocol 1997 acknowledged anthropogenic climate change. Melting Arctic ice and Category 5 hurricanes proved models. Greta Thunberg's school strike 2018 turned teenage anger into global Fridays for future marches, while carbon markets priced the skies. The Arab Spring began with a Tunisian fruit seller's self-immolation, 2010. Hashtag-fueled crowds toppled dictators in Cairo and Tripoli, yet Syria's peaceful protests mutated into civil war. ISIS carved a caliphate across Mosul and Raqqa, 2014 live-streaming atrocities, until Kurdish fighters and coalition air power ground it down. Terror returned to European boulevards, Charlie Hebdo, Bataclan, Manchester Arena, while social networks struggled to filter propaganda from free speech. In Asia, Xi Jinping assumed power 2012 and launched the Belt and Road Initiative, financing rail, port, and fiber corridors from Gwadar to Mombasa. Artificial islands sprouted in the South China Sea. The China Dream met Washington's pivot to Asia. Semiconductor supply chains, rare earths from Inner Mongolia, lithography in the Netherlands, fabs in Taiwan, became strategic choke points. Cryptocurrencies born with Satoshi Nakamoto's Bitcoin white paper, 2008, challenged fiat monopoly. Blockchain evangelists promised trust without banks, while ransomware gangs demanded payment in tokens. In labs, DeepMind's AlphaGo beat world champion Lee Sedol 2016, then cracked protein folding 2020. GPT-class language models generated code prose, even deepfakes. Policymakers wrestled with AI ethics bias, unemployment. Algorithmic surveillance mirroring 19th century fears of mechanized looms. On 31st December 2019, Wuhan reported atypical pneumonia. SARS-CoV-2 circled the globe by jetliner. By March 2020, half of humanity faced lockdown. mRNA vaccines BioNTech, Pfizer, and Moderna arrived in record time, but nationalism hoarded doses. Zoom classrooms and remote offices normalized digital presence. Meanwhile, supply chain snarls exposed just-in-time fragility. The pandemic killed over 15 million excess deaths, erased a decade of poverty reduction, and inflated debt to wartime levels. Resurgent nationalism accelerated. Britain's Brexit referendum 2016 severed 47 years in Europe's single market. Catalan separatists declared independence 2017. India revoked Kashmir's autonomy 2019. Social algorithms optimized for engagement amplified echo chambers, Pizzagate, QAnon, vaccine conspiracies eroding consensus. Energy and climate crises converged. Wildfires blackened California and Australia. The IPCC's Code Red 2021 warned of 1.5-degree C breach within 2 decades. Yet 2022's Russian invasion of Ukraine, Europe's largest war since 1945, rewired fuel flows overnight. Nord Stream pipelines went silent. LNG tankers queued for Spanish regasification. Food prices spiked as Black Sea grain exports stalled, driving unrest from Sri Lanka to the Sahel. Still, cooperation flickered. The Paris Accord 2015 set net zero pledges. COP28 debated carbon capture versus phase-out. African Union joined the G20 2023 seeking voice on debt restructuring and vaccine equity. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope unfolded gold mirrors a million miles out, returning infrared portraits of infant galaxies, reminding a bickering species of cosmic perspective. Private rockets, SpaceX Falcon, reusable stages and Starship prototypes lowered launch costs 90%, reviving dreams of Mars colonies. By 2025, 8 billion humans share a single anxious destiny. The same fiber cables that stream cat videos can shutter banks with a hack. The same jet that ferries strawberries in winter can spread zoonotic spillover. Civilization wields CRISPR scalpels, quantum processors, and renewable grids, yet also faces rising seas, autocratic seductions, and nuclear stockpiles of 12,500 warheads. The lesson, echoing from Sumer's canals to Silicon Valley servers, endures networks grant power. But resilience demands foresight, empathy, and an honest reckoning with unintended costs. Whether species-level coordination can outrun cascading crises, will script the next chapters of the human chronicle to chapters still blank and ours to write.